Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. What is up, everyone? I am your host, Charlie Shrem, and you're listening to another epic episode of the Charlie Shrem Show powered by Waxman, where together, twice a week, you and we get to dive deep with some of Bitcoin and crypto's most influential leaders, brilliant people in the room, those who have been around for a very long time in it, observing, building, doing all sorts of things to truly understand how the movement came to be, where we are right now in this moment. And I feel like every time we ask that question over the last 4 years, it's always different. And where we're going in the future, and kind of we end up predicting where we end up going. So it's a lot of fun. And you guys are in for a real treat today. Today on the show, we have Matt Leising. Matt, thank you. Did I pronounce your last name the right way?
It's Leising.
Leising.
So
Oh my, the
close.
one time I didn't ask before the show started was the time that I screwed it up. But that's like the story of my life. Matt
Yeah,
Leising,
no,
thank you
no
so
worries.
much for coming on the show today. You've been in the space a long time. You started off as a reporter since 2001, and for the past 17 years, you've been with Bloomberg News. You began covering crypto in 2015. You covered the DAO, which was the huge experiment back in the early days of Ethereum, where like $55 million was hacked in 2016. You wrote a book, super cool book called Out of the Ether in 2020. It's top selling book, The Amazing Story of Ethereum, and the DAO that almost destroyed it all, the $55 million heist. You also founded a really cool company now called DeCential. Is that right?
Yeah, you got it.
And DeCential, like, what really excited me kind of over the weekend, getting into the details of the show, is that we're doing the same thing. You and I are like committed, right on your website. You're committed to telling the stories of the founders, builders, and visionaries who are creating the new decentralized economy and internet experience. And you're right. You're right. Like it's exact. And how fun is it? I feel like I'm jealous because you actually got the book published, which I'm still trying to do. So any advice I would love. And you were
Okay.
just at ETH Denver. There's a lot of stuff happening there.
Yeah.
How are you feeling? Are you excited going into like 2023?
Yeah. Thank you for that kind intro. And I'm really happy to be here. I'm a big fan of the show and of you in general.
Thank you.
Um, I'm pretty excited. I'm getting a little concerned about the banking issues. They seem to be coming closer and closer to large kind of institutional
Yeah.
players like Gemini and Coinbase. So that's a concern, and I don't like the way that it seems to be carried out, like kind of like in these back channels where nobody's really telling us what's going on. It's just that Coinbase says it's not going to support U.S. dollar coin anymore, and then J.P. Morgan pulls out of Gemini, and like there's many other examples. So that to me feels a little nefarious and has given me kind of pause. You're right, though. I was just at ETH Denver, and you cannot come away from ETH Denver in 2023 without like this huge boost of adrenaline and enthusiasm because you would never have known from inside the walls of that conference that all this regulatory stuff is happening and
Oh
that
my God.
the bear market kind of persists. The amount of enthusiasm and building and just exploration and the ETH community has always been weird and strong and it's great to be back and see that in person again. So I hadn't been since 2019, and man, it is just like night and day between those 2 years. But other than that, I'm really excited to see what comes out of this bear market. Like a lot of things come out of bear markets, like DeFi summer and
Yeah.
collateralized lending and stuff like that. In
Yeah.
years past, even the NFT kind of craze, it came out of these doldrums and kind of pulled the whole market with it. So I'm fascinated to see where it's coming from. Like I don't know if you have any thoughts about like what might be coming out of this one and what area that is going to be sort of like the shiny new thing, but that's something that I'm really looking forward to.
It seems like the difference now than all the other bull and bear markets that we've had is during this last one that we just went through or are still going through to some extent, right? Or whatever. It could be longer. Who knows? But whatever we're in now, whatever we call it, because hindsight is 2020. It's a lot easier that we could talk about it once Bitcoin's back, over 100K and Ethereum's over 10,000 and everything's back to normal. Um, but whatever we're in now, it seems like what's different than the other dozen or so Bitcoin bubble and bursts that I've been through is that nothing changed much in crypto land, meaning that like the on-chain activity, if you will, people in the metaverse, on-chain activity in half of the blockchains that we have on the show, and you can go and anyone can go on. like DeFi Llama or different websites and check out the different statistics. But like these blockchains have actually grown over the last 6 months to 9 months, and activities, applications, cool services. I mean, just listen. Like, thank you for talking about the show, but like, if you just go listen to like the last 20 or 30 episodes, these are really cool applications that you can use now that just complementary value add to your life using a blockchain or crypto or some sort of like decentralized financing mechanism or not, or it's like education or something cool. But there's so much going on. And I just feel like maybe what happened, which always happens, was we got too ahead of ourselves, but we're finally catching up. And it's almost like now we're at the point where our prices are like artificially kept depressed, and there's like this operation choke point, and that's what happened in Bitcoin and crypto in the last 6 to 9 months. Is we saw this like choking off of all bank accounts from different exchanges. We saw all the fear, uncertainty, doubt around Tether and USDC and all these other tokens. We saw regulation by enforcement. We saw like a really nasty negative approach to our industry that was so like dirty and secretive. And it's like,
Yeah.
why? It didn't make sense. But like you said, ETH Denver, shrug it off. They shrug it off. And it's like, they don't care. And I never thought that I'd live in a world that wiring money to Europe and then buying crypto there is easier and safer than doing it in the US. It's a shit show out here. Like, who knew?
Yeah.
Here's my
Yeah. I
tirade
think,
for the morning.
yeah, yeah. I agree with you 100%. And I think the number of centralized failures we saw last year in crypto, really the shockwaves are still being felt for sure.
Yeah.
And I think FTX was obviously the worst, and Sam Bankman-Fried had spread a lot of money around DC, a lot of influence. He's now a lot of politicians have like dirty hands, and they're going to overreact, and I think that's what's going on. And so what I wish is that they'd hold some hearings, and like do this open in
That's a
Congress and
good
talk about,
idea. That's a good idea.
they do hearings from time to time, but I don't, they really should like just kind of address this issue in open, in the open public kind of sphere, and talk about what needs to be done. You could have people from both sides, excuse me, come and speak, and it would just feel much better than Gary Gensler kind of like sneaking these like lawsuits against people and stuff. And that's how you have to like navigate this world right now. That doesn't feel right to me. And I know I speak to these folks all the time. There's a lot of really great companies in the United States that want to play by the rules. They just don't know what they are, and that's a real problem here. So I hope Congress gets its act together. I hope the Fed and everybody can kind of start working again, so that it isn't
Yeah.
the case that wiring your money to Europe is easier. That's not what that's not what this is all about. So it's just getting
Oh,
so far afield of what the original intention was.
it's interesting that it doesn't seem to do us any good. The the regulatory actions have just come like after the fact. So none of their operations is actually like helping in any way. Like they didn't know FTX was going to fail. Excuse me. They didn't know these banks were going to start failing before they did. They didn't know Celsius and everything, and like how many licenses and regulatory compliance fees did these companies pay to different regulatory, but like for what? All for nothing. Same thing with the banks. Like it's one thing if like we trust these institutions and they work, but they just like there's just a lack of, I think, like there's no one supervising the supervisors for some reason. Like there's no one supervising these agencies that just go rogue, and like there's no hearings. Like you said, there needs to be hearings, and they need to figure out ways to like bring this out into the open instead of like, and that's the one thing I will have to hand it to a lot of these senators and stuff who are constantly banging on their gavels for these hearings, is that like they do kind of work or whatever. No one wants to get put in front of on live TV and any industry when they have to do it. It almost reins them in. But I did want to ask you a question on the journalism side of things, though. Is that, and maybe my bias is showing here a little bit, but I feel like we've done a decent job as an industry of like policing ourselves. And what I mean by that is like, hey, CoinDesk was the one who found all the FTX stuff. They were
Mhm.
the one who toppled the Ponzi scheme there. And same thing with half the other ones. Ryan Selkis was the one who brought down Mount Gox in 2014. I'm sure you were involved in many big impactful pieces. Like, do you think as an industry we like self clean ourselves?
That's funny you mentioned Ryan because I was just thinking I would love to see him at a congressional hearing, wouldn't you? You know,
He'd be
making the case for
perfect. He's
crypto. It
so
would be amazing.
brilliant.
Yeah,
Yeah,
he is great, and it would be perfect. Yeah, I think it's doing a pretty good job. You know, I think the journalism side of the industry is definitely growing up. I think just a few years ago, it still had a very trade press feel to it. You know,
yeah.
very insidery and sort of like you weren't sure about where the conflicts might lie, because that's kind of always the issue with trade press. But I think CoinDesk has grown more independent. They were, and I think we've seen some other kind of scandals come out with Decrypt and stuff with some of the FTX links. And so I think as the industry gets bigger, that's more people are relying on good independent journalism, and that's something that we're definitely trying to do at DeCential. We don't have ties to the industry, and I think it can be really hard as a reporter in crypto because a lot of times projects are very insular, and if you don't know the people who are like actually making the decisions, it can be very difficult to get good information on
Interesting.
name any project out there. So when I was covering Wall Street, there was like a ton of people you could find that were firsthand sources for stories. A lot of banks were involved. There would be lawyers, there would be PR people. So it was a much bigger kind of ecosystem where you could get scoops and find out stuff and verify it with a secondary source that's independent. And so what I found really quickly when I switched over to crypto is like that's really hard here because a lot of people don't want to talk. They might be hard to get to, or they're just putting their shit on Twitter. Like
Yeah.
it's like they're either one way or the other. So it's a very interesting area to cover. But I do agree with you. I think it's getting better, and I hope that trend continues.
That's a really interesting. That's a very interesting tidbit of knowledge that that anyone who's not a journalist didn't really understand about writing stories. What other like cool little tidbits of knowledge? Because uh, your world is completely your world was completely different than ones that we understand.
Yeah, I think on the downside here, I think that there's still a lot of companies that think they can pay you to write a story, and like that's how it's done. I think that's more prevalent in Asia. We've got some reporters over in Singapore and Hong Kong, and that's sort of like it's not that big a deal over there. Whereas obviously in the United States, that's totally like verboten.
Yeah.
Um, so there's still a little bit of that like pay to play. It's there's also you know you got to be a good reporter. Like the thing I've always said is knowing what you're writing about is almost the most important so that you can determine when somebody's trying to pull the wool over your eyes, you know? So you know enough to know that somebody's like just spouting bullshit. And so there's a lot of those folks in crypto, so you really need to be careful about like you need to know your stuff so that if they're talking about some new blockchain that's going to, be the next Ethereum killer, you need to know that history and you need to know like to be able to read a white paper or to understand the specs enough to get a sense of like yeah these guys are just looking for free publicity and this is most likely a scam, so that doesn't happen too often, but it definitely does happen. And it's certainly not something that I remember running across very often in the traditional financial world. Like there were some scams and frauds that we uncovered when I was at Bloomberg, but it's much more rare, I think, in that world. So, but other than that, it's not that much different as long as you understand the technology enough to be able to explain it to readers, and as long as you get out there and make meet people and create sources and build trust with folks. All that stuff is the same as what I was doing previously.
So do you think like our industry needs like better spokespeople to like
Yeah,
talk and explain
I
these
think
concepts?
and I think you're right in saying that there's a lot of stuff out there that's going on that you can be doing at any given day, right? But it still
Yeah.
hasn't made it through to the mainstream by any stretch. It's still way too risky and scary for people to open a wallet and have your private key, and don't lose that key or everything's gone. It's like
Yeah.
you don't really run across this user experience almost in any other thing in daily life in the United States. Most things are made to be like ridiculously stupidly convenient, right? And that's just like the lowest common denominator kind of thing. So that's got to improve, and I don't know when that's going to happen though. Like I
Yeah.
know public key private key management is a key thing here to this whole industry, but somebody's got to come up with some solution that makes it less terrifying, and like a lot just easier. So I think ENS is a step in that direction, but I think there needs to be more privacy. So that's sort of where I think it, I wish there was more building in that area of just like
Yeah.
the basic
That's
infrastructure
what we're
and
seeing.
architecture of it.
Yeah, that's what we're seeing
Yeah,
this the biggest struggle is like even the wallet experience or the different type of experiences that you have, it still feels very like old web style. It doesn't feel like new.
yeah,
Like a next step up. But but yeah. Tell me about putting together your book. Earlier I was saying uh did you put a treatment together? Did you then get a publisher? How did you get to from like the chicken and egg problem?
yeah, yeah. So while I was still at Bloomberg News, the DAO happened, the DAO hack, and I didn't write about it like in real time, but I was fascinated by it, and it just seemed like because I was, I had just gotten sort of into Ethereum or starting to learn about it when the hack occurred in June of 2016. So I just kind of followed it from afar. I think Ethereum at that point wasn't big enough to really be writing about at Bloomberg because there wasn't
Yep.
really any applications. Like the DAO was really the only thing going except for the price of the coin. So it wasn't like I was missing out, but I kept an eye on it. And then later that year, the Bloomberg Markets magazine always does a heist issue where we write about different heists,
Oh,
like bank
okay.
robberies and cool stuff. So
Very
I knew the
interesting.
editor there really well, and he came to me and said, "Hey, do you have any good heist stories?" And I'm like, "Oh yeah, I got a good one." So I pitched him on the DAO, and he said, "Yeah, go for it." And like, so I got to report on that for good 2 or 3 months. I interviewed a lot of the white hat hackers that kind of came
Yeah.
to the rescue and made sure that the rest of the money in the DAO didn't get stolen. So I got to know them pretty well. I already knew Vitalik, and I spoke to him, and I knew Joe Lubin, and so it just was like the most fun that I'd ever had on the beat, and I just loved the story, and I still do. I think it's just like science fiction.
What a
It's like
great story.
if you tried to make this up, nobody would believe it.
No.
So
And it's funny that when I got out of prison, the first time that I had heard about crypto at any point, because I was like, when I got out, I was like a little bit institutionalized and kind of weird. So I didn't have a smartphone and I worked at this restaurant and I was literally just picking up eggs at an Amish farm. And I heard on the radio about like this DAO on Ethereum. And I'm like, I better like turn on a computer. This is like 3 months I'm out because it sounds like Rome is burning or
yeah,
something or something.
yeah,
And
it was.
yeah, what happened?
It,
Like for those listeners, I mean, you definitely should read the book there, but as you're telling, the overview of the story, why was the DAO probably the most important and probably like why do you think a lot of people say that it was like the best thing that ever happened to Ethereum very early on?
I think it showed the promise of Ethereum and smart contract platforms in general because you took something that existed in the real world, like venture capital, basically, right? You go to a VC fund, you pitch them to get money for your startup so that you can pay the bills and create whatever you're trying to create. Here, the DAO took that and digitized it and put it on a blockchain and
Yeah.
said, here, you're going to come to the DAO, you make a proposal, and the members of the DAO will vote. And if you get approved, then you get some of our treasury and you can go away and make your thing. So it's, much more democratic. There's a ton of money. They had $250 million in their treasury when it was hacked. So and it was like kind of like the ethos of Ethereum. It's like everyone
Yeah.
has a chance here. Like it's all, it's like meritocratic. So I love that, and I think it was a fantastic idea. I think it came too early. The Solidity as a language wasn't even a year old. I think Ethereum wasn't even a year old, and there were a ton of bugs in the software. The
Oh
hack
yeah.
that occurred, nobody found the hack until it was too late. But there were other like 12 or 13 other big security issues that people identified before it went live, but they decided, let's just keep it going because everybody had their ether in there and everybody wanted it to succeed. And then so it gets hacked and it's like a really elegant hack. Like it's this two-step process and it's just like a gorgeous like
It
piece
was
of
so, yeah, it was
programming.
beautiful.
Yeah, yeah, it was amazing what they did. They're using some of the stolen funds to like fund the next attack, and it's just like this cycle that keeps churning. And unfortunately, no, like it broke, which is good because like the whole treasury could have been drained and nobody could have done anything. But so what I did, I wrote the magazine story. It came out and everybody really liked it. I had a great time doing it. It was called The Ether Thief. And so that was, I think that helped me within the people who were involved with the DAO because they saw what, the product of the story was and that they could trust me. So I used the story to as the springboard for a book proposal and went out and wrote a book proposal and said, here, I've already got this sort of part of the story and I want to like use this throughout the whole book, but then in other chapters tell the story of Ethereum and tell the story of Vitalik and where he came from and the people he gathered around him as co-founders to create Ethereum. And then the struggles that, the DAO and the fork and everything, So it was tough because, back then in 2017, 2018, it was, publishers were sort of like, what the hell is this thing? Like
Yeah.
they didn't quite get it. And so I went around to a lot of I ended up getting an agent, which was lucky. But then we struck out at almost every publisher except for Wiley, and they decided to pick it up. So they do
Yeah.
sort of like more technical books and sort of more like business books. So this isn't like Random House, where they're publishing like huge novels by people. It's sort of like on the technical side. But they gave me a lot of freedom, and so then I was able to just like really dive in and tell the entire story. I ended up interviewing Vitalik probably a dozen times, so maybe like 12 hours worth of interviews all on the record, and I went out to all the other co-founders and everybody I knew in the space and just had a wonderful it was a blast. I just loved it. And then I was able to write the book in about 2 months. Like I had so much great material by the time I'd done all the reporting that it just like spilled out of me. So it was really something that I just got super lucky and loved that whole process.
Wow, that's such a beautiful thing, and then you put it out there, and people are reading it and learning about everything that happened. The Yeah, the story of how Ethereum was founded is just like another great story too. All the early people, and it was like I go back and uh, look at some of the Skypes. I go back and look at all these early Skypes I had with Vitalik because the early Bitcoin community, we were on Skype mostly, and then IRC. And
Mhm.
Vitalik was very much a part of the early Bitcoin community, and was like,
Yeah.
we had this like Skype channel called, shit, I'm forgetting its name. Is like the Bitcoin Business Association or something like that. And it was just not any, it was a
BBA.
Skype group. There was no, we never associated, but it was like all the early Bitcoin people were there, and Vitalik was there. What was cool about Vitalik was that like he wrote for Bitcoin Magazine, but he very early declared his bias in like favor of this digital finance future, you know? So he was
Mhm.
like, he wasn't like you were writing from like an observer view about us without bias. And then he's like writing about in Bitcoin. He's the reason Bitcoin Magazine actually existed. His eloquent writing
Mhm.
was the reason Bitcoin Magazine was the first issue. I have it in my in on framed on my wall, actually, the first issue of Bitcoin Magazine, because my
Oh
ad is
yeah.
on the back of it, the Bit
The
Instant
one
ad,
with
our company.
yeah, the one with Guy Fawkes on
Yeah,
the
Guy
back.
Fawkes. And
Yeah. That was
Vitalik.
Mihai. That was
Yeah.
Mihai Alisi, the co-founder. He was the guy in the mask there.
Oh, I
He's
didn't know that was him in the mask,
yeah, that
actually.
was him.
Oh
Yeah, they
shit, I learn
couldn't.
something new every day.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh,
They
that's great.
couldn't. I
That's
think
like,
they
thanks for
had
that
some
knowledge.
model lined up or something, and then they fell through. But they had to get the cover done, so they just like Roxana, his girlfriend at the time,
Oh,
took
that's
that
great.
picture of him. Yeah, yeah,
That's a great story. I
yeah.
do you so do you think at what point did you develop your love for decentralized finance that you had to like kind of drop your journalist hat to start a crypto company.
Well, it came from the book because there were, I had already met a ton of people in crypto, and as you know, they're all really interesting and weird and smart and usually funny, but usually very kind of off. And like, I love them, and they're just like there's just a million stories out there to tell about these characters, and so I didn't feel that the press and the crypto side of things was doing that well enough. There are some places that are doing these features and things, but I really wanted to focus on the people that are making this stuff a reality because they're just fascinating and weird and funny. And you're coming from all walks of life, and like their backstories are just like, I love hearing about their backstories and like, how did you get into crypto? And so that was the real impetus because I believed in the technology. I realized pretty early when I was covering Wall Street that like Wall Street is just a big network, the banks, the
Yeah.
investments, the hedge funds, all these folks are connected. It's just kind of a shitty network, it's not very fast and it makes mistakes, but a blockchain is no different, it's a network. And so that made sense to me early on. And I could see how this was going to take off and how it could improve lots of different industries as we're seeing, as the years go by. But I thought that a lot of it was too tech focused, and I think that turns people off. And I
Yeah.
want to try to like spread adoption. So if I can tell you a really interesting story about Griff Green, or take
Love Griff.
any, yeah, he's amazing. Any other like 50 other people that I could name, then I might be able to tell you about what an NFT is, or like what's a public good, or why should crypto be helping in charitable world. So I think that's a really good entry point, and that's what we're really focusing on, and just trying to like celebrate almost the people who are doing this because I think they're amazing, and I
You're
don't think
preaching
they
to the
get
choir.
enough.
The
What's
name
that?
of the show for the first like 3 years was called Untold Stories, just because I feel
Yeah,
like when you tell people, and that's
yeah,
all we really have, because most of we're not like technical people, or we're not finance people. We were like misfits. So uh, we learned from ourselves and within our own industry. So sometimes the stories are the best way to like explain it to people. But you mentioned Griff for a
yeah,
second there, and then earlier you talked about these white hat hackers, and
yeah.
then you were telling the story of the DAO. But like, what happened there? Was there were some hackers that actually saved the money and people were able to
Yeah.
get their money back?
Yes, yeah. So um,
I don't
because it
want
was
to
a
ruin the
smart
story for people.
yeah, because it was a smart contract on Ethereum, the DAO itself, it takes a long time to fix it or change it, right? You have to go through a proposal, and like you have to vote on or you have to get people to update the software, basically to update their Ethereum client
Yeah.
to a version that has a different DAO in it. So that takes a lot of time, and that's why I was saying people were watching this money just walk out the door, and there was nothing they could do about it. So at the time, there was about $250 million worth of ether when the hack started. The hacker got about 55 million, and then like the way he was stealing it broke, and it didn't come back, like, so it stopped. So just to like, I know ether dropped in price, but let's just say that there's 200 million left. You're
It
laughing.
broke.
So anyway, like, like everyone that was smart in Ethereum now could go to the attack contract and be like, oh, this is how he did it, this is amazing, and they could have replicated it because it's all public, right? The money's just sitting there. So these guys like Griff Green and Alex Van de Sand and Jordi Bailina and Left Terrace, like all these like really smart guys, knew that they had to do something, like, because there was just this pot of money sitting there, and there was like a roadmap of how to steal it. So they got together and they had a Skype channel, and they called it the Robin Hood Group. That's where that name comes from, because they were like, we're going to go steal from the rich and give
was
to the
on
poor,
Skype.
like. So they all like figured it out really quickly. They kind of spun up their own attack contract, but they were really nervous about doing this because they didn't know if they were like breaking the law. They didn't know like the legal ramifications. So they were like terrified. But so the hack happened on a Friday. Then on that next Monday, like a copycat attack started, and it was like real. Like there had been some other copycats that were just sort of testing the waters, but this was a real hack. And so they knew they had to like they had to act now, or more
It would
ether
all
was
be
going to
gone.
get
Yeah.
thrown. Yeah, so they went into like attack mode themselves. and were able to clear out the treasury within a matter of hours because they just had, it's complicated, but they
They were the
had
early
like,
Ethereum developers too. Some of these guys were like friends
mhm,
with the overlap between the early founders and then some of those folks that you mentioned and the others. They were like very, very, very good friends. And so
yeah,
the
yeah,
relationship there of like being able to message the people who coded Ethereum probably helped.
yeah, yeah. It was a very tight knit community at that point. And like Christoph Jentz, who founded Slockit, which was the company that created the DAO,
Yeah.
had been a really important person in Ethereum, where he was the guy that was like trying to break
Yeah.
the contracts. Like he was doing everything he could to like test your code
Wasn't like
and make sure.
Stefan one of the like the spokespeople for Ethereum or something like that? Also the other created
Yep.
the creator?
Yeah. Yeah. He was at Slockit as well. And Griff Green, I think, was like their first employee at Slockit. So
I
he
have to
was
go
like,
read your book. I can't believe I haven't read it. There's this story is so fascinating. I actually think
you're
it's a
in there a
blessing
couple
that you
times,
got.
actually. Did you know that?
Say it again.
I, I mentioned you a couple times in there.
Oh, really? Good or bad?
One is, well, it's
I'm just
probably
joking.
bad from your point of view
When
because
did you
I
mention?
mentioned I
Oh, it's
mentioned
fine.
like I was trying to set the scene for the Miami Bitcoin conference in 2013 when Vitalik was going to present his white paper for the first time, and that's when you got arrested at, was it JFK, or
Yeah, I was at
where you got,
JFK.
yeah,
I may
because you were
have your
coming to
book in my
Miami.
library here
You were coming to Miami, right?
because I think someone sent me your book when
Okay,
I was in jail. No, you didn't. You released it like in
it came
2020,
out in
so no. But I
2020.
may have it
Yeah,
here somewhere. But yes, you were setting the stage. So I was arrested at JFK Airport the night that I was supposed to
en
like
route to Miami,
route to Miami to
right?
speak the next day. Yeah.
Yeah, right. Yeah, so I was just sort of setting the scene of like what was going on in crypto at that time, and so I mentioned that whole saga, and you know, the other thing was that people didn't know, that Mount Gox was being ripped off at that point, like as they were, at the
Yep.
conference. So anyway, but yeah, if you don't have a copy, I'll send you one. No problem. Just let me know. Um,
It's in my library. I have just
but yeah,
old
it's just like the
bookcases.
stories, these sort of stories are just everywhere. You don't have to, you can just like throw a rock and hit somebody in crypto and they've got an amazing story like
There's
this.
so
So
many
that's
stories.
kind of that's what I love about it. And as a reporter and a writer, like, characters are what you want, and so this industry is just chock full of them. So it's like being a kid in a candy store sometimes.
Yeah, you can write a whole book of just like mini stories,
Yeah, for sure.
and and then produce them. It's like some sort of like TV series or something like that, like the Untold stories. Well, that's what we're doing with the
Yep.
podcast episode. We've been doing the stories that we've had in the past 300 and your number 58, 358 episodes.
Wow,
I mean, just your
that's
story
amazing.
is amazing, and the people that you probably touched and talked to and met, and things like that. And then in the future, like 10 or 20, 30 years from now, our industry, I think, will have, we were the first new industry of the tech age. Not only that, I would argue that the religion of Satoshi, that it'll be known in the future, is like the first modern day religion. Like, what else do you call what we're even talking about? Like, from a cultural tradition point of view, or like being like like a moral compass or pillars to,
Hmm.
to guide you in life. Wouldn't you argue that like following what Satoshi and what the early Bitcoin and crypto community means, you can kind of find a religion in that?
Yeah, and that's something that definitely struck me at East Denver. There is a bit of religious fervor to it and belief. There's a very strong belief that these folks have that Satoshi, I think, you know, encouraged, or it sort of like tapped into some people's really deep frustrations with the financial world, and how banks operate. And some people want to be completely outside of that whole system, and for the first time Bitcoin gave that option to them. And I think
I'm
Ethereum and
writing this down.
other smart contracts are giving people the option to do a lot more, like and to lend and to borrow and to create NFTs and to raise money for your project through an ICO, which is like, those are all very core applications that a bank existed for so many centuries. But now crypto is giving people an alternative way to go about that stuff. So that's what I find fascinating and really interesting. I don't think Bitcoin's going to replace the dollar. I don't think Ethereum's going to replace Wall Street, but it gives people an alternative if they want one, you know. And I think Web3 is going to be the same thing. Like, it's not going to be the death of Facebook or Meta or whatever, but it's going to be an alternative for people who care about their privacy and want, you know, a different internet experience.
Do you think you fell in love with the like I'm okay to I'm a religious zealot for this. If this thing is a religion, like I love it. But do you think that a lot of times people tell me that they sit and they talk to someone like me, or we spend a weekend together and they like fall down the rabbit hole and they're completely converted? Was it Vitalik? Was it your hours of chats with him? Like, were you out to sit and you don't have to rush and you're able to ask him very deep questions? Like, what was your favorite question? Was he the person who you think helped you over that edge?
No, I was over the edge by then because, you know, I'm writing a
Well,
book
even
about
better.
it and like the history of it. And so I was all in. Couple things, like Joe Lubin, who founded Consensus, and he was also an Ethereum co-founder. He was in Brooklyn when I was in New York City, and I went over and visited him in Consensus pretty early, and he kind of blew my mind with the world computer talk. And like because I'd sort of understood the blockchain application as to how it applied to Wall Street, but until Ethereum came around, I didn't quite get it for other stuff. And then Joe, I remember him talking to me in the office in Bushwick, and it just really kind of clicked, and the light bulb went off over my head. And I was like, holy shit, if yeah, this network is a very powerful thing. You can see how it, you know, empowers Bitcoin and it doesn't break. But then if you can put like a computer on top of that network, it just like, that was like, oh yeah, now we're talking, you know, now the sky is the
Yeah.
limit. And that really got me interested. And then to answer your question about Vitalik, I think the thing that really was most, what I really loved the most was, you know, you mentioned him. He co-founded Bitcoin Magazine, and he loved Bitcoin, and he's trying to figure out if you could do more with Bitcoin.
Mm,
You know, like colored coins and different types of projects.
I remember the
And so he
blog
went on
post.
these. Yeah, he went on these travels, and like he went to the Freedom. You know, I can't remember what it's called in New Hampshire. You know, with Eric
Pork
Voorhees.
Fest, the freedom,
Yeah,
no,
yeah, yeah,
the conference that in Ashua,
yeah.
the
I think it's Pork Fest, right?
Pork Fest was the one in August. Did he go to
Okay.
there's two. I was a big part of that community too. Pork Fest was like the first time that you could use Bitcoin in real
Yeah,
life in
yeah, exactly.
campgrounds.
Yeah, so he went there and then he went over to Europe and traveled and sort of met in real life all these like really important people in the Bitcoin world. And he was sending emails home to his parents and friends at the time, and he shared a bunch of those emails with me, which was amazing
I
because
wonder if
it's
he
like,
wrote about the time that him and I tried lobster for the first time together.
I think he did. Yeah, were you in Hong Kong with him?
No, we were in New York.
Or okay, okay, I can't remember.
It doesn't
He
matter,
didn't
but that's
send. He didn't
but
give
yeah,
me
the
all of
emails.
them, but like just the fact that he gave me his emails, you know, so that I had like, like, you know, in the time that he was doing all this, his thoughts and his feelings, and like he was, you know, expressing doubts about what he was doing, and he didn't know if it was going to work, and all this great stuff was like, that was really something that I think gave the book a lot of depth and like really helped round him out as a human being because, you know, he's obviously incredibly smart. He comes off a little, you know, I don't like robotic, you know, and but man,
Mm.
he's funny. He's amazing. He's an amazing writer, like you said. He's actually really brilliant in like all subjects. He's not just like super smart on the computer science side. He was acing his calculus, his Latin, his Greek in high school. Like his English professor, like I talked to his English teacher, she still raves about him. And like the dude is like, he's you know, a man of all trades. You know, he's what do you call that? He's a Renaissance man. You
Yeah,
know, he's
definitely
like,
a
yeah,
modern day Renaissance man.
yeah.
He
So
gave us
that was
Ethereum.
some, yeah, that was something that really I thought was, you know, very generous of him and very trusting, but also just really helped me get like into his mind, which can be hard, you know, and you want to kind of get into the character's mind as you're telling a story like this.
He Sometimes for fun I go back to Bitcoin Magazine and I read the early articles that he wrote, and he was quite critical of me.
Oh yeah.
uh, well, in and the re- and but for good reason, and compliment. And I'm gonna give him a compliment here. Is that like again, his bias was that like he was just in love with Bitcoin. And his critical when he was critical of me, it was because Bit Instant took cash and sold people Bitcoin, and then also took their Bitcoin and gave them dollars back. And he just always in the articles made it a point where at some point in the article he wasn't just like explaining, he was hand holding the reader and saying like, but now make sure you know that not your keys, not your coins, or don't
Yeah.
trust, verify. He was like making sure that you understood that there was nothing crypto or decentralized about what my company was. We were simply like a way to a fiat on and off ramp. And I wasn't trying to be anything else, but like he almost was going out of the way to make sure people understood these concepts in depth. Like he never shied away from like diving deep into a concept and explaining it. Uh,
Hmm.
and then like sometimes I read these articles and I roll my eyes back then. Now I'm like, it's like reading an article, reading an article by an early, or young Jesus or something like that. Like it's just a brilliant person.
Yeah. Yeah, he was fighting the good fight. And
He was fighting the good fight. Yeah.
this is this is frustrating to me too, but that we still need this because people left their money at FTX, you know? Like how many times do you need to be told, or like are you not paying attention, or are you so brand new that you're leaving your stuff on an exchange? Because you know, I don't want to wish that on anybody that they lose their stuff, but like that's a
No,
great way to lose your stuff, you know?
we
And
don't learn.
like
You'll know. I've been in crypto 13 years, the Bitcoin, whatever, for so long. I had money in Voyager, lost it, and the same guy who bought my Mount Gox bankruptcy claim bought my Voyager claim. Like 12 years later. And he's like, I can see him on the other side of the computer. He's like, I told you so.
yeah, yeah. Hi Charlie, what do you
Hey,
got for
Charlie,
me
it's
now?
me again. That was the email. It's me again. I'm back.
Yeah, crap.
Hey, but at least Binance bought Voyager out, so that worked out pretty well for Voyager people. Um,
Yeah, yeah.
Thank God. I think CZ is just another also really brilliant. We're filled with a lot of really brilliant people because, like you and I, we're like didn't fit in socially in the rest of the world maybe, and for some
Mhm.
reason, industry required being able to be brilliant, the best doctor in the world, or the best of anything to really like push the world forward. You had to be well spoken, good looking, from a certain pedigree, a certain family, from a certain place, certain all these different. We don't have to go through the list, but the early Bitcoin community and still crypto, it was always like, we don't care about any of those things. What do you
Mhm.
bring to the table? How are you
Yeah.
making the world a better place? How are you making me more wealthy? How are you giving me more freedom or whatever? It doesn't matter. I don't care about any of the other like metrics or like things that could change the equal playing field. Nothing, it doesn't matter because when you're behind a computer screen, you're what you bring to the table is the only thing that you're judged on and nothing else. And that's what I fell in love with the early community too.
Yeah. Yeah, you said it, like it's the even playing field. You know, this is all open source. This is all done in public. You know, this is not, it's the antithesis of like backroom deals. You know, it's people trying to create a community. You know, you throw something up on you know, you know, commit stuff on,
Yeah.
GitHub or whatever, and just like it's all there, and people can just dive into it. And I think that's what is really attractive to a lot of people too when they realize that about this industry.
It's a great theme to the episode is like the whole transparency theme and everything like that. But Matt, thank you so much for taking the time and coming on the show today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Charlie. Yeah, this was an absolute pleasure. Really enjoyed it. And like I said, big fan of you or yours.
Thank you. Don't send me a copy of the book. I want to purchase it so I can contribute to the economy. But you got
Okay.
to sign it. I need a signed copy, so maybe you can send me one. But check it out, everyone. Out of the Ether. Get on Amazon or wherever books are sold. Matt, thank you so much for coming on the show today, and I'll talk to you soon.
Great. Thank you.